All right, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Zojo Developer Evangelist. Today, we're going to be talking about building and selling your Zojo apps. This will be a little different than some of the other webinars. I'm only briefly going to be in Zojo for a little while, and then I'm just going to go talk about a variety of things that are related to selling your apps and things you need to think about. And we'll look at some websites and some other tools that might help and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get started. And before I do that, I want to bring up my usual. If you have questions, just type them into the question box anytime while I'm typing. I'll see them on my other screen, and I'll get to them when I can. All right, so I have open here in Zojo one of the example projects. This is a little sliders game. Nothing too exciting here. You just click on the tiles, and the idea is to get them in numerical order in as fewest moves as possible. Like that. 38 moves is not my best score. So anyway, this little app here, we can pretend that, this is, going to be the world's greatest app and it's going to make all of us millionaires. So now you want to get it out there. What do? We're going to start assuming you've already created an app, but you're now thinking about, all right, I need to deploy it. Well, one thing I want to point out for people in the Zojo Navigator is, and in case you haven't noticed, the deployment targets are listed right here in the left under the build settings. And any ones you want to deploy for, you just check the box next to it. And then when you click the build button, which we'll do in a moment, it will build for each of these platforms. Now, obviously, you're not going to want to create your entire app only testing on one platform if you intend to deploy to multiple platforms. You can't just wait till the end and then check more boxes and then hit the build button and expect everything to work perfectly. So throughout your development, you're going to want to make sure that you're periodically testing and running and building on the platforms that you do intend to ship on at the end. And you can do this by simply creating periodic beta builds if you want, and then running them on the various platforms. For debugging purposes, you're probably going to want to use the remote debugger and have that set up on the different platforms, and then run it right from within Zojo and use the run remotely option. And then you set up in here and add your remote machines that are running the remote debugger stub. And when you click run, it'll compile it for the right platform, copy it across the network to the remote machine, and you'll be able to run it there, but still use the Zojo debugger to isolate any possible issues. And when you click on each of the items in here, you'll notice there are specific settings. And you'll probably already have all these created and filled out. Linux doesn't really have anything other than the app name. Windows has just a few things in here you can tweak for company and product and internal names. And these are things that show up on properties if the user were to right-click on your app in Windows Explorer and then look at the properties. Not likely most users are even going to be able to find the app, let alone decide to right-click and look at the properties. And then the important thing to remember with OS X apps is, and you'll know this the first time you try to run it, Cocoa apps require the bundle identifier, which is usually written something like this, reverse domain name style. So assuming you got everything the way you want, you click the little build button. And of course, you need a license for Zojo to be able to build. You can use Zojo for free to do all your development and testing and whatnot. But when it comes time to actually create the standalone builds, you're going to need to have a license so that it can build it for you. So I'll drag this Finder window over here. So this is my app, and it created a build folder here. And you can see in here I've got each of the folders for the platforms. The OS X version is right here. Looks nice. Get the icon. Double click it. Looks like it runs. Linux version is going to be compressed. No, it's not compressed. Sorry. It's compressed when you compile it on different platforms. So you can see the Linux version is here. This folder could just be compressed and then copied over to a Linux machine for testing or for bundling in installers, which we'll be talking about momentarily. And also the Windows version is also here. And you can see on both the Linux and the Windows versions, there is a corresponding libs folder. It's very important you remember to include that with however you decide to bundle this. And then, of course, the exe, that is what the user actually runs. Now this is all fine and dandy, and particularly for OS 10 apps, they're pretty easy to deploy and deliver to your users because it's usually just a single file. You can have supporting files, of course, but it's often just a single file. So you can just make this available. You can just right-click on it and click compress, and you get a zip file, and you can make your zip file available. People can download it, unzip it, copy it to their applications folder, and run it. That's all nice and easy. The other platforms maybe are not quite so nice and easy, in particular Windows. On Windows, people really, really expect to have an installer for applications. And they expect this for a variety of reasons. One, on Windows, people generally don't monkey around in the program files folder. They often don't even see it. It might even be hidden by default when you open up Windows Explorer on normal Windows installations. People expect on Windows to be able to run apps by either seeing an icon on the desktop or using the Start menu, which unfortunately disappeared for a while in Windows 8, but I hear is making a return in Windows 8.1. So that did make it, the Start menu made it a little tricky for people to find stuff on Windows 8 because they had to go back to the main application launcher. But nonetheless, people expect to be able to run their apps that way. And in order to set all that up, you're really going to want to use an installer of some kind. So here I'm going to move into talking about a couple of the Windows installers. And I made a little bookmarks folder here of all kinds of places we're going to go and look at and talk about today. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is Inno Setup. And this is a great little installer. It's free. Obviously, it runs on Windows, so you'll need to actually have access to a Windows machine in order to create your installation file. Now, that's not 100% true. I tend to do almost all my development on my OS 10, my Mac Pro, which is running OS 10, and I have virtual machines set up for all the other operating systems, so I can jump between them and do what I need to do, run installers like this as well. And it turns out the Inno setup also happens to work well using now I'm going to forget the name of it, but the product is based on Wine Code Weavers, I think is the name of it. Let me just see if that rings a bell here. Yeah, Crossover, that's what it is. Yeah, so these guys here, I didn't bookmark this one. These guys here make a product called Crossover that emulates the Windows API and runs on a Mac or Linux. And it does turn out the Inno setup does run under this. So theoretically, you could use this to create your installer files without ever having an actual Windows installation or license. Yeah, someone's noting here that Crossover does not work very well. And it works very well for the apps that it works very well with. For other apps, it doesn't work very well at all. But Inno Setup does work within it. And I have at times used Inno Setup within Crossover to quickly create an installer so I didn't have to fire up a full VM and load Windows or whatnot. But most of the time, you're really going to want the full version of the operating system. So Inno Setup is pretty good. Like I said, it's free. It does use a script. You can see here, it's kind of a command line thing. They do include a few tools to help you build something by default. If you go to the Doc Wiki, we do have a page in here with a sample Inno setup script that you can use as a starting point, and it shows you what you can, you can pretty much just copy this entire thing in there and then just change the paths to point to whatever you want in the names and whatnot. And this will, and then you can run this in the Inno setup, and you'd have yourself an installer that you can distribute for your Windows users. So certainly Inno Setup's a great one to start with. Another one that is also quite nice is Advanced Installer. Now this one is available in two editions. It has a freeware edition that's gives you access to a very small subset of its features, but might be all that you need for creating installers for your Zojo apps. And then there's a full-featured version that is really very pricey. I think it actually costs more than Zojo itself, and does all kinds of other stuff that I won't get into. But the nice thing about this particular installer is it has a full user interface. You don't write a script to create your installer. You drag and drop everything, and you create your script that way. it also has the ability, InnoSetup can only create what are called setup exe installers, which are great, but some, depending on who you're deploying it to, particularly some businesses prefer to have the MSI format, which is the Microsoft installer format, and I believe that allows network installations and a few other things that might make it easier for larger companies. And Advanced Installer can create the MSI installer format. So that's another reason why you might want to consider it. But either of these two work really great, and probably, I'd recommend you check out one or both of them for all your Windows installer needs. When you get to the Linux side, it starts to get more complicated, as it always does when dealing with Linux. Before I jump over to Linux, though, I do want to talk about a couple of the OS X ones. So on OS X, you're rarely going to ship an installer. People generally don't expect that, and so it's somewhat uncommon. Some apps do have installers, particularly apps that need to copy files in particular system locations, but most apps don't need to do that and thus don't need an installer. But should you need an installer for one reason or another, there's two available. This one here is also free. It's called Iceberg. I've used this one quite a bit. It works really well. And Apple also includes Package Maker with their development tools. I found Package Maker to be rather buggy and crash a lot when I'm trying to make installers. So the times I have had to make them, I've almost always used Iceberg. But like I mentioned briefly earlier, much more typical on OS X is no installer at all. I'm seeing more and more common that people are just distributing a zip. And then also a thing you often see are disk images, DMGs. And this particular tool here, DMG Canvas, is a great way to create DMGs. It allows you to throw images on them, and so you can have explanation text or whatnot. So if a DMG's how you want to go, certainly a tool like DMG Canvas works great. I don't think this one is free, but it's not terribly expensive. And there's lots of other tools. And you don't even need a tool to create a DMG. You can just use disk utility in OS X as well. Now moving on to Linux. Linux gets more complicated. I've used this tool in the past, but unfortunately they've now discontinued development of it. And InstallJammer is a pretty nice GUI that allows you to create an installer that works on a variety of Linux platforms. It still works, I believe. I think I've used it in the past 6 months or so. So if you need a Linux installer, this is probably the easiest thing to look at first. Is InstallJammer, grab it. You can just drag in the stuff you need. It'll create an installer, and you can use that to distribute. Your other option is to ignore the installer on Linux and just ship a zip and assume that, well, these people are running Linux. They're obviously already advanced users. They're going to know what to do with that and how to unzip it and where to put it. And that, again, is going to depend on your user base. And the last alternative is to create the platform-specific installer format files for the particular distributions. So, for example, the Debian-based distributions like Ubuntu use a format that's called Deb, short, and it's a very particular format. It can be very tricky to build. I don't have specifics on that. You can Google around for instructions, but they're very tedious. There's also an equivalent thing for Red Hat ones called RPMs, and it's pretty tricky to build those things. I have on my to-do list an attempt to see if I'm going to be able to dig around enough to maybe come up with some sort of tutorial to do that, but I'm not 100% sure be able to come up with that. But we'll talk about some other options related to that in a moment. But that is a different alternative you can go with for distributing your Linux applications. And once you have your app all bundled up and packaged and ready to be distributed, how do you distribute it? Well, let's now switch gears and talk about marketplaces or places where you can actually sell your apps. And we'll obviously talk about the big one to begin with, which is if you made a Mac app, right here, the Mac App Store is probably the biggest marketplace for Mac apps. And there are a lot of Xojo apps in the Mac App Store right now. I don't have an exact number, but we have an awful lot. We actually have a thread or topic on the forum for people that have submitted apps to the Mac App Store that are available in there to purchase, so they can post their links and a short description of them. And then there's already many posts in that topic. So you can see the Mac App Store has a ton of stuff. It's very nicely presented. You have big icons, obvious prices. It's very easy to purchase. It's all great, but getting into the Mac App Store is a heck of a lot of work. And there's a lot of restrictions as well. So some apps may not even ever make it into the Mac App Store. The first thing to worry about with the Mac App Store is that you need to be a member of the Apple's Mac Developer Program, which is $100 a year. It's $100 a year. You get a bunch of things from Apple, including the ability to submit your apps to the Mac App Store. If you stop paying that, your apps come out of the Mac App Store, as far as I understand this. So it's a continual yearly cost. But it does give you access to that. You also, in addition to that, you also get access to pre-release versions of OS X, which is really nice. Right now, anyone in this program would have access to the Mavericks release and be able to play with that. And a bunch of other stuff. You obviously get access to their development tools, but anyone can get those. Those are just free. And you do get access to their technical documentation, not all of which is always publicly available. So that's the first thing. The other thing is you have to decide is whether you want to go in the Mac App Store. Apple takes 30% off the top of the selling price as their commission. You do get to keep the other 70%. They do have restrictions on the type of apps that go in there. The apps have to be sandboxed, which pretty much means they're really going to need to be Cocoa apps. So if you have a Carbon app, you may be able to get it into the Mac App Store if it's not using particular things that would break sandboxing. But more than likely it's going to need to be Cocoa. There might be other restrictions too as to what sort of things the app can use or what it can do. It has to be reviewed by Apple, which can take a period of time. So you can submit your app up to Apple, say, hey, I got my app done. I want to submit it now for the Mac App Store. It can take anywhere from a week to multiple weeks before Apple gets around to reviewing it and approving it. From what I hear from people, most of the time your first submission isn't approved. It's rejected for some reason or another, and then you need to determine what the cause of the rejection is and fix it and then resubmit. So it can be a pretty time-consuming process. But the good news is once you get an app in the Mac App Store, it's very visible. A lot of Mac users go there. So it's great it's a great way for people to find your apps. It's also very easy to install them because they just have a one-click button. It installs. They don't have to worry about checking for new versions or anything like that because the operating system itself does it. So the Mac App Store is great. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of Xojo apps in the Mac App Store already. And there's a couple ways you can go about doing that. Let's see. I want to go back to here. First of all, if you get a free app in the Mac App Store, it's a piece of cake, really. You just you build your app as a Cocoa app and you submit it to the Mac App Store and sandbox it as appropriate. And there are a couple tools I'll bring up. I shouldn't save the bookmarks for those, but I should be able to Google those pretty quickly. And I'm going to point you to this tutorial here that Thomas Templeman wrote a little while ago, but it's still relevant. And it shows you how you can make use of Os Lib Libraries, which are an open source collection of OS X controls, access to APIs and whatnot. And in particular, in here is a way to access the validation code for apps that are submitted to the Mac App Store. And this allows you, if you're actually selling an app and someone buys it, they can't just copy that app to their friend's computer and have it work because there's validation code in there that will validate against the Apple ID to ensure that they've actually purchased it. And you can take advantage of this built-in feature of OS X just by pretty much following the steps that Thomas outlines in this guide and including Mac OS Lib in your project. If it's a free app, though, you don't have to worry about validating these validation certificates. So you don't really need any of this stuff. You just need to do the sandboxing thing. Good. This has links right here to the two other tools. And if you are submitting to the Mac App Store, there's two third-party companies make products that work great with it: App Wrapper and RB Package Maker. And this one handles, I didn't mention the code signing. That's a requirement for the Mac App Store, but you're probably going to want to do that for any Mac app regardless, which does require a developer account as well. Sandboxing, which I mentioned, which is really kind of a pain in the butt. Hopefully Apple comes around on that and realizes it's probably not providing all the benefits they think. And then a bunch of other things with, verification, icons and whatnot, handling file types, that sort of stuff. So App Wrapper does that. Package Maker pretty much does the same things. And trying to think, and I think there's also an App Wrapper Mini that's in the Mac App Store itself. That's kind of a mini version of this. It doesn't quite do as many things and is more integrated with Zojo, but I haven't used that product. So these are all the things you have to think about when you're getting your app into the Mac App Store. So it's certainly not, all right, I just finished my app, months and months of work, boom, now I can take, an hour and I'll get in the Mac App Store. You're going to need to plan to take a little bit more time there at the end and make sure you got everything hooked up properly so you can get it into the Mac App Store. But certainly if you have a Mac app, it's absolutely worth getting your app in there. Everyone seems to be reporting that a large chunk of sales do come from the Mac App Store. But there is no restrictions, so you can put your app in multiple places. So even if you have your app in the Mac App Store, you can sell it elsewhere, which we'll get into some other areas in a moment. So let's look at a couple other marketplaces, if you will. Let's see here. Oh yeah, and there is a blog post I wrote here back in July that kind of covers a lot of this stuff. So if you need to refer to it, you can head over to the blog and get a list of some of the things you have to think about there when dealing with the Mac App Store. Ubuntu also has a store, the Ubuntu Software Center, and you can submit apps into that. You need a Ubuntu developer account. These are free. Submitting to the store is free. The Ubuntu Store, or Software Center as they call it, does not handle payment processing for you, so they don't take a cut, but you'll have to figure out how to handle that yourself. We did recently, I guess it was in July, add Zojo to the Ubuntu Software Center, but it's in there as a free app, and all licensing is done through us at our online store. And certainly submitting a free app that way was incredibly easy. It took less than a week, I think. They have a nice web form you can walk through, and they actually have the ability to create the deb installer for you automatically. You just provide them with a zip, and behind the scenes they unzip everything, package it up as a deb installer for you, which is what their little storefront needs to do the installation. And I did write a quick post summarizing this as well on the blog. So you can read a little bit about that and see what's available there. And the other marketplace that I'm aware of is the one on Amazon. I don't have much experience with this one, but from what I understand, it seems to be populated with a lot of big name brand stuff you might see on the shelves of something like Best Buy or some retail store. But that's not a requirement, and it looks like you can submit your own software to get added to their store. I don't know the specifics of what they take for a percentage and that sort of thing and any rules they have, but it is Amazon, so you might expect that they're going to be as heavy-handed as Apple. I don't know what this form looks like, so that's a little vague there. You got to kind of request some info when they get back to you. But that is another possibility, and it looks like they do offer Windows and Mac software. Unfortunately, the Windows Store, which would be the next obvious thing to show you, is not an option for Zojo-made applications because the Windows Store only sells, use the right term, Windows 8 new UI applications or the Metro applications. And Zojo, of course, creates Win32 applications, and they don't accept Win32 applications to their store. And of course, that means their store is only good for people running Windows 8, which at this point still remains a fairly low percentage of people running Windows in general, although probably higher than the other platforms still. So those are the main marketplaces that are available for you to list apps for sale that people can find things pretty easily. And let me just run over here and see if there's any questions that I can answer. All right, there's a question here. Can you make your own installer using the Windows shell? Perhaps. I'm not aware of a Windows shell command that creates installers. I've only ever seen third-party apps that do that. But you could certainly have a Zojo build script that fires off a shell command that launches a tool that creates an installer, and you can have that all kind of integrated. Yeah, I don't. Will they allow Zojo 64-bit apps on the Windows Store? I think I already touched on the Windows Store. Yeah, right now Zojo apps aren't in the Windows Store at all, and Zojo doesn't create 64-bit apps just yet anyway. All right, so, but you can, of course, sell your stuff on your own. You don't have to go through these marketplaces, and in some cases, you can do both. You can sell it in a marketplace, and you can sell it on your own, and there's a lot of companies that do that. And, but you have to pay attention to the marketplace to see if they have any restrictions. Apple has no restrictions on their Mac App Store. Ubuntu has no restrictions regarding anything that I know of. I have no idea what what Amazon's rules are regarding that. If they insist it only be in their store, doesn't seem like it, since all this stuff is things I've seen for sale elsewhere. But you definitely, those are always things you want to double check. So if we move down through the list here, you can always sell something yourself by putting it on your own webpage, but you're going to want to handle people paying you. And there's a ton of companies that do stuff like that. So I'm going to fly through a few of them here. It turns out this Accelerate link doesn't actually show you anything terribly useful except the login page. Let's see if the Google search brings up anything more helpful, but apparently not. Well, Accelerate is probably a very common one that's used with Zojo apps because, oh, here we go. And Digital River is probably going to own several of the ones I'm going to cover here, for better or for worse. Accelerate is probably used by a lot of Zojo apps because they actually include a plugin that you can use in your Zojo apps to allow you to do in-app purchasing, and it does handle the ability to generate registration codes for serial numbers. So that's always handy to not have to do that stuff yourself. The plugin has been in various states of support. It took them a little while to get a Cocoa version ready, and then when they did, I believe then the Windows one broke, and then it took them a while to get that synced up. But I think everything might be okay now. There's been some posts on the forum about that. But Accelerate has been used for a long time. And in fact, personally, I've used Accelerate for many, many years, and they've worked reasonably well. Certainly the user interface for the website is kind of clunky. I think they take about 8 or 9% of the sale price, but they handle credit card processing, around the world and other things. So it's pretty easy to work with. So they're not a bad one to consider. A newer one that seems to be coming up in popularity is FastSpring. And this one I like a lot. In fact, I've actually started switching some of the products that I had on my own website from Accelerate to FastSpring just this year for a variety of reasons. But I really like FastSpring. Their website was incredibly easy to use. They take about the same percentage off the top. But the website was much easier to use. They were very responsive to support, getting back to answers. In fact, I actually ran into an issue with Accelerate, and I was able to go to FastSpring, create a new account, and get stuff hooked up before Accelerate even got back to me with my support question. So that's how easy FastSpring was to use. In particular, I like FastSpring's ability to interface to a remote server for generating registration codes. Which is something we'll talk about in a moment. It was incredibly easy to do that with FastSpring, and I had a lot of trouble getting that to work with Accelerate. Let's see, and there's a bunch of other ones as well. These are the first two I brought up because they're the first two that I've used. But there's a lot of other ones that people use. I think ShareIt is also owned by Digital River, so it's somehow in under their umbrella. I haven't used this one. I don't know why you'd use this over Accelerate or what the differences are, but it's another one to consider. And I'll just rattle off a few of the other ones here. Of course, you can use PayPal. A lot of people don't like PayPal, but they do charge lower fees than some of these other processors, so it might be one you want to consider. eJunkie is another one. Stripe is a relatively newer one that handles payment processing. I just recently heard about this Gumroad one. I don't have any experience with it, but it seemed like it was pretty easy to use and had a lower, yeah, it had a slightly lower percentage. So that's another one to consider. And these are the sort of things that you need to, be investigating before you get to the point where you're like, all right, ready to sell. How do I do it? And odds are once you pick one of these stores, you're going to probably stick with it for a while. You're not going to want to have a bunch of products each using a different store. That would kind of be a pretty big hassle. Kagi, I guess is how you would pronounce this one, is another one that's I've heard is used quite a bit. I don't know, again, much about this one. But so like I said, there's a lot of them here. And I will point out another article by Thomas Templeman on using, because now we're going to transition to, well, you sell stuff on your, I got another recommendation here in the comment area or the question area that says FastSpring is awesome. And that's what I keep hearing. Every time I ask someone or get feedback on FastSpring, I always get nothing but positive feedback. So that's always good to hear. If you are selling your own product on your own, you're gonna want some way to make sure that it's not just completely distributable. If you're selling it, generally you want to provide a license, a serial code, registration code, something like that. So you need some way to generate such a thing. Like I said, Accelerate has the plugins that will do that for you. If you're using any of these other methods, you pretty much kind of have to come up with your own. Thomas Templeman did write an article here about using the Aquatic Prime licensing framework. And this appears to be some sort of standard for generating fairly robust licensing. And from what I understand, FastSpring has support for this in some manner. And I think Accelerate might as well. But interfacing this with Zojo is not something I've personally done, but certainly Thomas has done it. And this sort of thing, if it's a path you want to go down, asking about this in the forum and see what other users have done this and how it works for them is certainly an option. It does appear that a lot of people just roll their own tool for generating license keys or registration codes. A very simple way you can do that is a little thing I put up on my website a long, long time ago. Regcode. And this little app, you just give it a, these things would all be secrets that only your app would know about. And then you run this thing on your own. You have your secret information and you type in whatever the user name is or email, whatever you want to use for identifying information here. And you get a code back. And then your app uses this information, generates a code based on the name and this information. And if the code matches what they typed as their registration code or license key, then you know that essentially the software has been paid for at least, once. And you can, turn on full mode as opposed to demo mode or however you're dealing with your distribution in that manner. And this works perfectly fine. This was posted, like I said, a long time ago. This is very manual. This would require, like, you got an email of a sale and you fire up this app, you type in the information and you mail back the customer the code, which is obviously doesn't scale very well. And, who the heck wants to do that all the time? This can be translated very easily to a web app that converts to a web service so that you could call a URL with the information and it would return back a code. And that would work great with services like FastSpring or whatnot. And I'm also seeing a note here in the comments that FastSpring has an API in C and Objective-C. And yeah, I haven't used or looked at that, so I don't know specifically how well that would work or if it would work with Zojo. But they do have a pretty extensive documentation over at FastSpring. So I think you can actually create an account with them. Yeah, these places generally don't charge you money to create an account because they take the commission off the sales. So you can try and create accounts with them and read their docs and see what works. But you do want to consider your registration code mechanism for regardless of, what one you choose, you're going to want to have one if you're selling stuff on your own. All right. Okay, so that's covers, and then again, this is all high level stuff. I didn't go into specific details of how to create your installer, or because that'd probably take a whole hour just to go through that, or how to deploy to the App Store, because that would probably take a day or two to go through that. And I didn't go through, how to create an account with FastSpring and to, set all that stuff up there. That probably wouldn't that might be possible to do that within an hour. I don't know. But this is more of an overview to give you an idea of what things you're going to need to consider so that, people know that your app is now available to purchase and they can purchase it and give you money. So the next thing to think about is getting the word out on your app. You've now created your app. It's users can deploy it. You've got places to sell it. You can take money for people that want to buy it. Well, how do people now know that it's available for purchase? So you want to get the word out. Well, the first thing you can do is, I'm just going to type it in the address bar here because it's the only thing I have on the screen. It lets me type. You can send an email to pr@zojo.com. That's for press release. pr@zojo.com with your press release, and we'll get that posted up in the forum. We have an announcement channel in the forum. We'll post your press release there, and we'll push out things on Twitter and Facebook and that sort of stuff because we really love it when people make apps using Xojo, and we want to let the world know about it as much as you do. So certainly start by that. Let us know about your app, and we're happy to do what we can to get some word out there for you. Another service that offers press release writing and pushing and publishing is PR Mac, and this obviously geared towards Mac apps. But I think these guys charge something like $20. You can create your press release with them, and they'll push out the press release pretty much all over the internet, dozens upon dozens of websites and other things. They even have services for writing press releases if you wanted to pay them to help you write that. So that's another one you might want to check out is PR Mac. A great way in general to get the word out is to have people write about it. Blog posts are great. If you write your own blog post, that's great. And again, you can start to submit your blog posts to various places to get people to link to it. Getting other people to write blog posts about your app is probably even better. That's a lot harder to do, obviously. A lot of these PR services can help because they'll get your word out more, and then other people might write a little blurb about it and link to it. If you're lucky, they'll get back to you. Maybe you can send them a registration code and they'll try it out. Maybe they'll even write a review of it, or maybe just a longer blurb. So stuff like that can be helpful. We do at times have people write guest posts on the Xojo blog. So if that's something you're interested in, by all means, get in contact with me, paul@zojo.com. We love to have people talk about cool ways to use Xojo, and if it happens that you have a cool thing you've done and you create an app with it and it makes sense to talk about, we'd love to hear from you. Let's see, there's another website here. This wasn't working for me earlier. Bits du jour. And yeah, it looks like the site's not coming up again. This is some sort of little promo website that allows you to, they have like specials for the day. So you'd have like the one day where your app is 50% off or something like that. At least what I gathered in the brief time I was able to look at the website. But like I said, it still seems to be down. So you might want to make a note of that and see if that's still relevant. If you got a Mac app, macupdate.com is a great place to make sure it's listed. A lot of people still go here to search for apps. And they do periodically run, not periodically, I think they run a promo every day. I don't know how you get on this promo list, but this is the same sort of thing where, like, for one day, you can see here this is marked down. It used to be $18, now it's $9.95 for one day. And a lot of people monitor these promos, and you can end up with a bunch of sales for the one day while your app is on sale and get more exposure for your app in general. So something else to think about. Like, I don't exactly know how you get on a promo list, if that's kind of invite only or if you get to request it, but something to look into. which brings up a related thing, which are bundles. And I've seen a few people talk about this on the forum. Bundles are kind of you see these from time to time. I think I'll bring up the one right now for Zojo. We have a bunch of third-party manufacturers that make stuff that works with Zojo that have gathered together and created a bundle. And there's a bunch of products in here. And the way bundles work is everyone that submits their app or their product or whatever to the bundle gets a small cut of the bundle price. And bundles vary in price. I think this Zojo bundle is a few $100. There it is, $400. So imagine, each person in here is going to get some percentage of the 400, but the idea is that because it's bundled, you'll sell a lot more. You see these a lot on things like Mac Update does them, Mac Heist has done them, Stack Social has done them. And you can make some pretty decent money from that because so many bundles get sold. If you're just paid a few bucks per bundle, but they sell many thousands of bundles, it could be worth your while. So, but again, from what I gather from people, getting asked to be in a bundle is kind of hit or miss. It might be invite only. But again, it can't hurt to touch base with the people that do the bundles and see if they might be interested in something you're offering, if a bundle is something that makes sense for you. And let me just scan my links here to see if there's anything else I missed that I wanted to bring up. We'll bring up the link from Mac OS Lib. This is on GitHub, which you can, if you have Git and you use Git, you can plug in the clone URL and just pull it down. But if you don't, you can just click the button here and download the zip file and, just deal with it that way. All right, I think I got through most of these, or all of these. Oh, I don't know if I brought up this one to check out. Oh, this is just another online payment processing thing. I haven't used this one. So just another one to look at. So if there's any questions on these sort of things, now's the time to ask them. While I clear up my tabs here. All right, yeah, I am going to point out here in the off-topic channel, we have this sticky topic at the top, the Zojo apps in the Mac App Store. And you can see here there's a lot of posts. People have created a lot of apps. A lot of links to apps. So here, not only do you see people that have created apps that are in the Mac App Store, but you now know your fellow Zojo developers that have done so. So, now prime targets for asking good questions. I believe Sam is the one that makes the app wrapper tools. He's always has great advice on how to deal with sandboxing and other App Store related things, as does Thomas. So certainly, as I often mention in these webinars, our community has a lot of people with a lot of experience. You want to take advantage of that. And I'm sure there's a few other topics that are in the forum regarding this general conversation. That's where I got several of the names for the payment processors that I wasn't familiar with in that topic. People that have used them or either didn't like them or whatnot. And again, it's if you're considering 4 or 5 different things, it's often very helpful to ask people, hey, what do you use? Why do you like it? Why do you don't like it? Rather than just picking one blindly. Here's a question here. Why would you list your apps in a developer forum? Yeah, that's a good point. If your apps are listed in the development forum, it's not like, all these people are going to be like, ooh, I'm going to go buy an app here because it's listed. But any exposure is good exposure. Some people do make developer tools like RegRx that maybe make sense in the developer form, but a lot of it is just to build the community and help people share what they've done and talk about what's worked and what hasn't worked. And it's always good to get links to your products out there. So it's not going to give you the most traffic, that's for sure, but people like to know what's made with Zojo, what's out there. And frankly, a lot of people like to know that you can put stuff in these places, because it's not like it's 100% obvious that you can submit a Zojo app to the Mac App Store. People might assume that you have to use Apple's tools to do that when you really don't. And the same with the other stores. All right. Are there any other questions that people want to ask on this topic or anything Zojo related? I'm checking my time here. Looks like we got a few minutes left, so I'm open for any questions that I might be able to answer for people in the time remaining. And we do have listed on our front page here is a couple, well, I guess 3 now, apps that were made with Zojo that are available in some manner or another. And I believe our marketing department now is collecting um, more for an additional section of the website. So certainly, like I mentioned before, if you've created an app and you want us to like highlight it or anything like that, by all means, just let us know. I don't know the specifics of this, if it's going to be a page that has every app or if we're culling it and picking out specific apps and highlighting them, or if it's going to change over time. But, just get in touch with us and we can see if something's going to make sense. It's like I said, any promotion is better than no promotion. All right, here's a question here that's interesting one. What about licenses and product liability? Could you get sued if your app causes a crash damage? Well, yeah, I suppose you could get sued. You can get sued for anything. The trick to deal with that, I suppose, is to have your business set up appropriately so that becomes a not worthwhile thing to deal with. And I suppose it matters as to what sort of industry you're in or whatnot. So if you start selling things, you're probably not going to want to be selling them just under your name. You're probably going to want to form some sort of entity. I can't really offer advice on that. Here in the United States, a limited liability corporation, an LLC, or an actual corporation or an S corporation, probably more typical, are very common and great ways to provide some level of liability protection. But that you'll need to talk with however you're deciding to handle your company. I can't say I've heard of cases where people get sued because of apps are crashing or damage is being caused, unless your app is being sold to people where, mission critical, life threatening kind of things. But that's more of a business thing rather than a technical deployment and selling thing. And then someone here is asking about the Windows Store. Must have come in late on that. The Microsoft's Windows Store only accepts what are called Metro apps, which use the new UI system, and Zojo only creates Win32 apps. So Microsoft does not accept Win32 apps in their store. So their store, I actually haven't looked at their store lately. I need to fire up my Windows 8 VM and take a look what's in there. Like I said, Windows 8 does not have a high percentage as far as usage goes. I think Windows 7 is leading the pack right now. So anything that's in the Windows 8 store only runs on Windows 8. I don't know how substantive their thing is. And I had one comment that says, I swear I've seen non-Metro apps in the Windows Store. And it's entirely possible that you have. but I bet they're Microsoft apps. I bet Microsoft puts whatever they want that's theirs in the store. I've never heard of any non-Microsoft, non-Metro apps in the store. Unless they've recently changed that policy and I'm not aware, but yeah, it was Office. It was the comment here. Yeah, Microsoft, much like Apple, can put whatever they want in their own stores, and that does frustrate some developers because Apple has many. I believe from what I've heard is that none of Apple's apps that are in their own app store are sandbox, like they require all the other developers that submit apps to be sandbox. And I suppose that's okay. I mean, it's their stuff. They know it. They trust it, obviously, but it can make for an unfair advantage because that means Apple's apps can do things that submitted apps cannot. But nonetheless, Apple's store, Apple's playground, you want to sell with them, you got to follow their rules, and same with the other companies that make stores. I have no idea if Microsoft's going to open up their store more broadly. They seem to be changing their plans rather frequently. Uh, News-wise, I think I heard they just formally bought out Nokia today. And Steve Ballmer stepped down in the last week or two. So they have a bunch of changes that are probably coming down the pike. So it'll be interesting to see how Microsoft's dealing with stuff like that. All right, well, there don't seem to be a lot of questions. So we're a few minutes early today, but I guess we'll wrap it up. And what I'll do here is what I usually do at the end is just see what's coming up next week. Not only does it help remind you, but it helps remind me, as I always like to know what I'm talking about in the coming week. Yes, so next week is our monthly Q&A topic. If you can't make it, but you want me to cover or answer a question so you can get it answered later and it'll be recorded for posterity as these all are, you can certainly email me a question. I'll add it to the list and we'll cover it. Oh, and I've got a great reminder from someone that I need to run a poll. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I constantly forget these polls. So I'm starting the little poll here. So like I said, next week is the Q&A thing. I answer whatever I can. And it looks like Jeff might be popping into this one. So that'll be exciting. That might mean I don't have to answer as many questions. So that'll be great. So Q&A is always, I like that one. It's great having random questions from people get put right on the spot. Can't always answer all of them, but that's a fun time. And then the list box one is another popular one. People are always asking about the list box. So the week after that, I'll be talking about the list box. I have a new sample project that'll demonstrate most of the events and stuff that's in the list box. So you can see how you can use it to do a bunch of things. So that should be a good one. And there's just another general thing here. Someone asked if I can add a thread question for the thread webinar. Well, you can certainly ask any question you want at any point in time in any webinar. It may not get answered if we don't have enough time or whatnot, but I want to also add, you can always certainly email me if you have a specific question, paul@zojo.com. I'm happy to answer any question I can. And I often have people do that have attended a webinar because the answer may not be something that's easily explained. And might require maybe an example project or something that's written. So, don't hesitate. You're not required to come to a webinar to ask us questions. You can email us. You can go to the forum. You can post something on Twitter, whatever works. And with that, I will wrap things up here. Thank everyone for coming and have a great rest of your day.